Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Joint Judiciary Committee. Fellow committee members, I think this is the first joint committee to get things underway for the interim follies, and so welcome back. It seemed to come pretty quickly, didn't it? But at any rate, Emily or Clarissa, maybe take roll for us if you would, please.
Senator Case.
Present.
Senator Cooper.
Here.
Senator Furphy.
Here.
Senator Schuler.
Here.
Representative Chestick.
Here.
Representative Crago.
Excused.
Representative Haroldson.
Here.
Representative Jennings.
Here.
Representative Nemec.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Here.
Co-chairman Washut.
Here.
Co-chairman Landon.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. Appreciate that. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders, committee, and those tuning in this morning. Turn off your telephones, put them on airport mode or whatever, if you would. And we are streaming the meeting today, so be careful with the side conversations. Everybody in Wyoming is related, so be careful with that. We'll get underway here in a minute. Just a couple of things to start with. This is always the best time of the year, I think, because it gives us an opportunity to work together. We don't always get that during the session. I don't know about all of you, but I didn't get down to the other end of the hall very often. We were all pretty busy, and so I look forward to working with our House colleagues and love the makeup of our committee. We've got a lot of good friends here who I think the other thing I'm looking forward to is learning a great deal. Some of us are new to the Judiciary Committee, so I see some friends out there and I see some folks who are friends that I haven't met yet. So we look forward to the work ahead. Mr. Co-Chairman, any thoughts to start the day?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I just looking through our list of interim topics, and my first thought was, with no offense to Senator Furphy, this is so much better than talking about banking and trusts. So I'm really excited about the topics that we have before us, and I think we're going to do some good work, learn a lot. And I don't know how many bills we're going to crank out this interim, but that's yet to be determined. But I think we're going to learn a lot, and we may be able to do some good in the budget next year as well. So thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. With that said, I think we can get underway this morning. We have one piece of official duty that the co-chairman and I have visited about, just to let the committee know regarding absentee votes during the interim. Those will not be allowed unless our committee members have sat through a substantial portion of the debate on a given bill. So certainly if someone has to leave early from a meeting, we will take that under consideration, but no absentee votes as we go through the interim. We expect folks to be here or be tuned in. Okay, so let's get started. The first order of business, committee, is consideration of interim committee rules. I would entertain a motion. It should be in your packet. I would entertain a motion for adoption of the interim committee rules.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cooper.
I'd move that we adopt the interim committee rules as written.
Okay, it's been moved. Do I hear a second? Second by Representative Rodriguez Williams. Discussion. Any discussion? Representative Jennings.
On page 2, I'm just a question. Then we've striking out chairman or vice chairman. I get that we're going to co-chairman. Are we just making that to where just the co-chairman? I mean, because when you read that, it sounds like it's one or the other, and it seems like it ought to be both. co-chairman. On page 2B,
Um,
seems like it should be multiple since
okay, you're under
two people.
subparagraph B.
Yeah,
The time and place of meeting of the joint interim committee shall be designated by the co-chairmen or
Okay.
members calling the
Got it.
meeting.
it's gonna need, never mind.
Yeah, so I think it's, in other words, for us, it would be Representative Washington and I will sit down
Yeah.
and decide when we'll meet. So
There's just a technical correction.
any other questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those opposed, no. I'm looking over at Brian. Brian, did we need a roll call vote on that? Are we good? Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Moving on then, first item for our consideration, under our law enforcement issues, directive from the Management Council. I'd like to welcome the Attorney General's office this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
If you would be kind enough to please introduce yourselves for those streaming in and for the committee as well. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Kara Chambers. I am the Director of the Division of Victim Service with the Attorney General's Office, and I serve as the Attorney General's Office Legislative Liaison, and I am joined.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kelsey Singleton. I'm a Senior Assistant Attorney General at the Wyoming Attorney General's Office, and I represent the Division of Criminal Investigation.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm Allison Moore. I'm the Deputy Director of DCI over the Criminal Justice Information Services section.
Thank you all for being here. Let's launch in. We look forward to it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. I am solely here to address the legal issues, but I've got my expert here, Allison Moore, if the committee has any agency-related specific questions. The first issue I will start with is the sex offender registration issue on the agenda. I think a short background of the Sex Offender Registration Act will help with the discussion. So I'll first do a brief overview of the act. I did see that Ms. Adams with LSO provided a really thorough memorandum on the Sex Offender Registration Act, so we really appreciate that. 719-302 lists the sex offenses that are registerable in Wyoming. There are 3 classifications under 719-302. They're generally based on the severity of the offense. Offenses under subsection G are considered the least severe, and we refer to them as G offenses. H, medium level severity, and we refer to those as H offenses, and then J, the most severe, and we refer to those as J offenses. And all adult offenders with registerable sex offenses have to register. However, only juveniles that have J offenses are required to register. All sex offenders have a lifetime obligation to register, but they can petition the court under 719-304 to be removed from the registry if certain requirements are met. G offenders, after maintaining a clean record, can be removed after 10 years, H after 25, and J cannot be removed from the registry unless they are juvenile J offenders, and they can be removed after 10 years. It's completely within the district court's discretion to grant or deny a petition to be removed from the registry, so long as the offender maintains that clean record. So every offense that is registerable is listed in section 302, either under J, H, or J. And there's also a definition of offender in 719-301 and a definition of criminal offense against a minor in 301. These definitions together list all of the offenses in 302, but there are certain offenses that are defined in 301 that are not included in section 302 under G, H, or J. They include felonious restraint, false imprisonment, human trafficking, and sexual servitude. And because these offenses are not in 302, the division cannot require an offender to register if they are convicted of these offenses. So that being the case, if the legislature intended for these 4 offenses, which we believe they did, to register, then these offenses need to be added to 302 to require that registration. If
you-
not,
I
I'm sorry.
apologize. Can you do me a favor and go back over those 4 real quickly?
Absolutely. Yep. Felonious restraint is the first one. False imprisonment is the second one. Human trafficking is the third. And sexual servitude is the fourth.
Thank you for letting me interrupt. Appreciate it. Please continue.
I would additionally note that in prior versions of the sex offender statute, felonious restraint and false imprisonment were registerable. The statutes, however, were significantly overhauled in 2007, and the classifications changed from categories of what we called sex offenses and then another category, aggravated sex offenses, to the 3 categories we have now under G, H, and J. And then human trafficking and sexual servitude offenses, those were enacted in 2013. And they were added to the definition section in 301, but not the registration requirement section in 302. We'd also note there's a defined term in 301. It's criminal offense against a minor. That's in 301. It's never actually used in the statute. So there's really no purpose in defining it in 301 if we're not going to use it in the statute. And I think that is part of the confusion of why those offenses weren't considered registerable, is there's some confusion with, well, if we include them in the definition, then they'll be registerable offenses. So we recommend just removing that definition from 301 to avoid any confusion in the future if additional sex offenses are added. So if there are any questions with regard to the covered offenses under the sex offender registration, I'm happy to try to answer those for you.
Questions, committee. Representative Oakley, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm just wondering, this discussion that felonious restraint and false imprisonment, like you felt like were excluded like accidentally. I'm interested, and I probably should know, but why do you think that? And then also, I mean, are your thoughts that those should be? There's not a sex component with those. So I'm interested in that.
Mr. Chairman.
I missed your name to start with. I apologize.
No problem. My name is Kelsey Singleton.
Okay, thank you, Council. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Representative Oakley, we believe because it was added to the definition section in 2007, that there was some intent there to make it a registerable offense. Otherwise, it would have been removed from the definition section. Certainly, maybe the legislature had intended otherwise and it forgot to remove it from 301. As for the fact that there's not a sexual component to felonious restraint and false imprisonment, there are a couple others. I can't recall all of them off the top of my head, but I know kidnapping for sure is one that is a registerable offense that doesn't necessarily have a sex component, but is a registerable offense.
Follow up, Representative. Okay. Other questions thus far? Okay, Ms. Gang, please continue.
Thank you. I will move on to the controlled substances, form of substances issue. And I think we'll play musical chairs here a little bit. Again, I'm kind of the legal person, but I certainly am no expert in chemistry or toxicology. So I have the unit leader of the state crime labs, chemistry and toxicology unit to answer kind of the chemistry side of it. So I'd first refer the committee to Wyoming statute 35-7-1031. It includes criminal offenses for possession, manufacture, delivery, and possession with intent to manufacture or deliver controlled substances. And section 1031 distinguishes violations of controlled substances based on the schedule of the controlled substance, the form of the controlled substance, the type of the controlled substance, and the weight. And specifically with regard to the form of the controlled substance, the statute distinguishes violations based on whether the controlled substance is in plant form, liquid form, powder or crystalline form, pill or capsule form, cocaine-based crack form, or LSD. And there are various methods and forms of ingesting and using controlled substances, and I think those are added over time. And sometimes the form in which the controlled substance is in when the state crime lab goes to test, it does not fit into one of these categories. And as a result, these forms cause problems for the state crime lab when they are testifying in criminal cases. And it caused ultimately an issue with prosecuting these drug offenses. For example, there are some differences in opinion between prosecutors on how to classify black tar heroin. It doesn't squarely fit into one of those forms. Another example is chocolate mushrooms. Another is THC wax. Some even say that they don't fit into any category, so they won't prosecute them at all. And things like black tar heroin are significant controlled substances that are a danger to the public. And certainly those should be considered and included in 1031. Additionally, law enforcement has seen an increase in various food products infused with controlled substances. We often hear of these as edibles. And because of the carrier, this could result in a dispute as to what form the actual controlled substance is and which one it should be prosecuted under. For example, the THC in an edible may be in liquid form originally, but then it's added to a food substance, you know, a gummy, a Cheeto, something. Does that change the form of what it's considered to be? So the division has looked to other jurisdictions to determine alternatives for classifying controlled substances. One form is something that the federal government does. State of Nebraska is very similar as well. They distinguish violations based on the weight and the type of the controlled substance, but with regard to form, they just say both statutes are both refer to a mixture or substance, which could include a variety of forms, which would probably encompass all the ones we're having difficulty determining which form they come in. This language would be significantly broader, so it would be more appropriate to cover the various forms that the state crime lab would be testing. And certainly there are several ways in which the form of the substance issue could be resolved. Maybe it's just adding additional forms to the statute we currently have. I'll leave that all up to your guys' discretion, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
I'm just sitting here realizing that I really appreciate Mr. Fuller being over there because I'm pretty sure you know what statute we're landing in right here. So questions? Yeah, that's chocolate covered. Representative Oakley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it Singletary? Thank you. So you kind of touched on it, but just trying to figure out I know you probably don't want to give an opinion on this, but like what the best way to get there is. One of my thoughts are, discussing this, like, why does it need form? Why would form need to be an element? Like, and of course, as you know, the plant form now, marijuana is in so many different types of forms, oils and wax and things like that. Of course, then weight can be a problem because of that. So then, but I just think, I don't know, perhaps, and maybe that's what you said, Nebraska, just as a mixture or something of this substance and just get rid of sort of that section. Is that maybe what you would recommend? First question, while I've got you. Can you discuss the Delta 8 situation?
Can go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to Representative Oakley, I think for the first question, we would recommend just getting rid of the form altogether. I'm not sure there is a purpose for distinguishing, considering the way we test. I will let Ms. Barrett speak to your second question.
Can you do me a favor and introduce yourself this morning just for all streaming in and for the committee? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sarah Barrett. I'm the Drug Chemistry and Toxicology Supervisor at the State Crime Lab. Do you have Representative Oakley, do you have a question specific to Delta 8 or just in general?
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. I want to understand what the issue is, obviously, so then we can solve it. So anything you've got on that would be great.
So Delta 8 is Delta 8 THC is an isomer of.
A little closer to the
Okay,
microphone. Thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Delta 8 THC is an isomer of Delta 9 THC. It is in hemp in very low amounts. So it does naturally occur in the hemp plant. However, we believe that most Delta 8 THC that we see on the market is synthetically created from cannabidiol or CBD. It's a very simple process to convert that from CBD to Delta 8 THC. Our laboratory can identify Delta 8 THC. However, we do not attach a schedule to that because it does naturally occur in very small amounts in the hemp plant.
Okay, so I sense a follow-up, Representative Oakley. I'd like to learn more too, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so then the problem being you don't attach it to a schedule. But so my question is it appearing in a concentration that's high enough that it therefore is something that would be the equivalent of other types of intoxicants? I mean, because I think that's the question, right? Like if it's supposed to be this hemp, which this body carved out an exception for, and I know is causing issues as far as identification, and I assume that's what we're dealing with here. But so what you're saying is it doesn't attach to a schedule because it's Delta 8, but we do know that it actually is an intoxicant that's maybe equivalent to, what is it, Delta 9 or other types of THC?
Mr. Chairman, that is accurate. So Delta 8 does have impairing qualities. It is psychoactive like Delta 9 to a slightly lesser degree. I should also mention that Delta 8 THC is the same compound as Delta 6 THC, which is specifically listed in Schedule 1 controlled substance. However, because the hemp issue, if it naturally occurs in the plant, then it is excluded.
So, Ms. Barrett, I step off the bank and the water's really deep for me on this whole front. If we talk craft beers, I'm much more up to speed, but I have to say that I have so many constituents who have come up to me and asked, what exactly are we doing here in Wyoming? So I think I'd like to keep drilling on this a little bit because I think it is important. When we legalized hemp products, it just feels like we blurred the lines all over the place. Can you help me understand what we've done? And so going back to Representative Oakley's question, when does that product cross the line? Can you help me with that?
Mr. Chairman, I believe if we could prove, and there's no scientific way to prove how that Delta 8 THC came to be, if it was in fact naturally occurring, or if it was synthetically converted, then we may be able to say, oh yes, this Delta 8 THC is Schedule 1. However, there's no scientific way to determine the origin of that Delta 8 THC. And so we don't attach a schedule to that. There may be perhaps the case information available. Maybe there's a belief that the individual knew how the Delta 8 THC was made. And so there might be an argument there on the prosecutorial side, but from the scientific side, there's no way to determine how that Delta 8 THC came to be, whether synthetic or naturally occurring.
So walking into a hemp product store, for example, we just at this point are pretty much hands off. Is that what I'm hearing you say? We don't really touch those, and they can be of any significant dose that that they want to meet, right? I mean,
Mr. Chairman, we will test them and provide a report to the best of our ability. As far as prosecutorial, what happens with it after we report on the item, I can't say.
so I'm curious, I'm looking down at one of our prosecutors. So are we seeing cases which challenge, somebody selling some of this stuff? Is that how that comes to be? And what kind of numbers are we looking at? Is it significant to your operation?
So our state crime lab, when we talk about items worked, we analyze about 40% of THC items, about 38% methamphetamine items. And then we've seen a rise in fentanyl, which I know you guys are aware of and addressed last year. But those would be the top three that we see right now. We still do see heroin and cocaine, LSD, and we've seen an increase in mushrooms. It seems like since the decriminalization down in Denver, we've seen an increase in mushrooms, but THC is our number one, and a close second is methamphetamine.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I did not realize 40%. Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, just a quick question. So it's my understanding that some states have closed that loophole through legislation, through statute. How have those states that have closed that loophole, how do crime labs in those states handle that issue?
Hey, Ms. Barrett.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure of another state, maybe, I'm not sure of another state that has accomplished that or how they have done that. I would potentially say Delta 8 THC, no matter the origin, is a Schedule I controlled substance.
So just to put you on the spot, Ms. Barrett, if you were us and you had the ability to change things to help your operation, what would you suggest to us?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that opportunity. I would.
Do you really mean that?
Yeah. I think in terms of making life at my job easier, definitely having Delta 8 THC in two different areas where, if it's naturally occurring, which we can't tell if it was naturally occurring or not, then it's okay. It's not controlled at all. Versus, it is a Schedule I controlled substance specifically listed if it is synthetically produced. I think that obviously is an issue. And so I would like that to be cleared up. In terms of the forms of controlled substances, definitely the heroin issue. I'll tell you a quick anecdotal story. We had a case where there were two individuals involved. One had 3 grams of crystalline material. 3 grams is the felony weight threshold for crystalline material. We identified methamphetamine in that item. That individual received a felony conviction and spent time in jail. His partner had 28 grams of black tar heroin. And because of the form issue, that individual, he got a misdemeanor citation for almost 9 times the amount that his friend had of methamphetamine. So that to me is a significant amount of heroin. And the fact that he got a misdemeanor citation on that quantity is concerning. So to me, that is a large issue that should be addressed with the forms issue.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's talk about Delta 10. I see that on the sign out in front of the store down from my house.
Mm-hmm.
What's the relationship of Delta 10 to Delta 8? Is one more intoxicating than the other? Is Delta 10 included, excluded? Help me out.
So, Ms. Barrett, the Delta 10 is a much bigger airplane, right? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Delta 10 is another isomer of THC. The difference between those structures is the movement of a double bond. And I know I'm getting into chemistry here, but it's the movement of a double bond around a ring. So it's the same core structure. It's just where that double bond is along the ring. And there are slight differences in how psychoactive those compounds are, but I believe there is psychoactivity for Delta 9, obviously Delta 8, and then Delta 10.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. And does Delta 10 naturally occur in hemp as well?
Mr. Chairman, I am not certain on that one. I'd have to research that some more.
You know, the way things are progressing, I would assume that maybe by now, if it hadn't been before, but Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So sorry, I'm going to rewind us a little bit. Sarah, you were mentioning that obviously we know it's naturally occurring, Delta 8 is naturally occurring in hemp on small quantity, but synthetic is predominantly where it's coming from, what was my knowledge. So as we talk about this regulatory concept, how much do you believe they're getting naturally occurring Delta 8 compared to synthetic Delta 8? Because from my research is, and I'm with you guys, when I heard Delta 8, I'm like, what the heck is that? So I just did what probably all of us do and just jumped on Google and started doing some research. And from what I was reading, naturally occurring is very rare to get enough quantity to actually be viable. So it's synthetic is kind of what we're finding. Can you speak to that? How much are we seeing that's naturally occurring being used compared to what we feel are synthetics?
Ms. Barrett, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, what you found is the same that I found, and what the forensic chemistry community believes is that almost all of it is synthetic. It's proving that that's the problem.
Follow up, Representative, are you good? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand proving that is the problem because what they're creating is almost molecularly identical, or is molecularly identical. But my question is, I guess I come back to, I understand with it being naturally occurring, we don't want to control it. There's that balance of controlling that substance. But from what we're finding, that's not what's causing the issues with our students. That's not what's causing. I mean, it's this synthetically modified and synthetically built we're now fighting kids going to ERs over.
Right.
So I mean, I understand where we're at, but I believe there has to come a point where we do have to draw some sort of line, or we're going to continue to see this spiral out of control. So I don't know. Maybe that wasn't even a question. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman,
Barrett, go
I
ahead.
do.
So then the follow-up question to the representative is there ever a way to draw a line between the naturally occurring and the synthetic? And I think I hear you saying this morning that there is not.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to follow up with that, and then I've got a question. The idea of being statutorily, what we do is take that out as this arbitrarily drawn line of what the origins are, and that solves that problem. Would you agree?
So Ms. Barrett, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, I would agree.
So Representative, I have a question down your direction, which if we take the line out, does that do anything in terms of prosecution, or can you help us with that?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Representative.
yes, and I think I'm on the same page with the crime lab here. That is exactly the problem. So, and this is what, if I can ask a question real quick and then finish.
Yeah.
So Ms. Barrett, you do have the capability to test percentage and potency on all of these, Delta 8, Delta 10. Is that accurate?
That's inaccurate.
So tell me about that before I can finish answering this.
Go ahead.
So in terms of percentage, like you talk about, we have the capability to test for Delta 9 THC above 1%. We can qualitatively and when I say qualitatively, I'm saying we can identify that there is Delta 8 present. We cannot right now say how much Delta 8 THC is present.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So even if we take away the origin problem, the reality is, how do you then, with the 0.03% that exists in statute, how do you overcome that, or does this solve the problem at all?
Ms. Barrett.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the 0.3% in statute specifically refers to Delta 9 THC only.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barrett, Is there technology? You say we can't do it, but is there technology that does accomplish this? Is this maybe something we could remedy by buying new technology for our laboratory?
Mr. Chairman, we probably have the technology currently. We do not have a validated method, so it would take time, analyst time to bring that online.
Not sure what that means.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you. I guess I'm not sure what that means. Could you explain a little more? We have the technology, but we don't have the ability.
No, Mr. Chairman, I think we have the same technology we would need, we use right now for Delta 9 THC. Before we use a method on casework, we validate it heavily to make sure that it works as intended, so that when we're using it with casework, we know we're getting the right answer, because we understand that we're dealing with people's futures, their lives here. So we want to make sure that we're getting the right answer. So we would need to make a validated method to be able to distinguish the percentage of Delta 8 THC, if that's the committee's wish.
Okay, Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're pretty deep in the weeds of chemistry here, and I'm not really sure what are the practical effects in the real world, such as what are the risks to the users of these various substances? Are they identifiably higher or lower depending on which variant of the Delta it is?
Ms. Barrett, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's an unknown. We know that there's psychoactive components like Delta 9 THC, potentially to a slightly lesser degree. But in terms of what's in these products that are being sold in head shops, we don't know what else is in there. We don't know how it's going to affect people until they take it and have a negative effect.
Representative, you good? It's a good question. Going back to the co-chairman's question, Ms. Barrett, I think where he was going and where I intended to go, do you have what you need? I mean, if we bring a couple of bills which would change our statutes, do you have what it takes to analyze some of this stuff? And it sounds like you feel like you're in pretty good shape that way.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's correct. We would need time.
Yeah.
But that's probably the main thing we would need at this point.
Okay. Committee, anything else? Representative Spencer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm trying to look forward in terms of if we change what the statute is and the threshold, and we currently have businesses that are selling legally substances that maybe we're going to prohibit. I mean, what does that look like on the ground in terms of, does law enforcement go check in on those businesses? How are we just say we stop selling, we don't go talk to them? I'm trying to understand kind of that practicality of it. Thank you.
Good question. Go ahead. Yeah.
We'll play chairs again.
Calling in a little backup here. If you would be good enough to introduce yourselves, please, and
Yes,
speak into the microphone. We've got a big cavernous room here.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Ronnie Jones, and as of 8 o'clock this morning, I'm the new director of DCI.
Thank you. How about that? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, we ran into this same issue several years ago when CBD came out, and local stores around the state were selling CBD. What we did at the time was we went to different stores around the state, purchased CBD, and had it tested at the lab. And when it came back above the legal limit, we had a conversation with those stores and explained to them what they were selling was illegal. And I don't recall any prosecutions that came out of that. There obviously were some businesses that were upset because they had spent money on this inventory, and we had asked them to remove that inventory from their shelves. And most of them, I guess I don't know if they all did, But as far as I'm aware, they voluntarily removed those items from their shelves until it was more clear what was legal and what was not. So I would see a similar situation. You know, I personally would not feel comfortable on day one going out to all of these stores and, you know, purchasing or seizing all of the inventory. I don't think that would be the right approach. I think the right approach would probably be to test some of these substances and provide them with the information that we got back from the lab and educate them. And, you know, ultimately let them make their own decision on how they want to move forward after, you know, a reasonable amount of time.
Follow up? Okay, so it seems to me, Director, that you're suggesting if we do something on this front, maybe an enactment date that is pushed out a ways so that you have time to get out across the state and help people understand what the new law is going to be if we were to pass one. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that would make sense to me, as well as probably some type of, you know, public relations on our end, or when I say our end, law enforcement's end on here's the new law, here's the date, and, you know, really be available to either provide laboratory services to test their substances. Now, I don't know what that looks like in reality because of the volume. But I do think a reasonable amount of time for businesses to understand the change in the law and how it's going to affect their business would be appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Director, and look forward to working with you on many topics as the years go by. My question is on the psychoactive effect of the Delta 8, Delta 10. I'm assuming it's like the other products that the more you use, the greater the psychoactive effect, that someone who takes a little bit has a milder effect than someone who takes a great quantity. Is that true?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know the answer to that. I would refer to Ms. Barrett.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I believe that would be true.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Please proceed, and any other thoughts you have on this front. I'm hoping that we took good notes and we will consider some things that you've suggested to us. Looking over at our good professional staff too. So hopefully they've taken some good notes. Any other thoughts on this front? Ms. Barrett, really appreciate you being here. A lot of wheels turning on what we might be able to do. If we were to pass the legislation we just talked about, for example, I think that would create some impact to your office, for example, to your lab. So we might want to think about that, and I would ask you to think about that. Okay, so anything else on this front? Okay, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just you mentioned time, and I think what the co-chairman's getting at here is, you know, how much time, you know, and the time that the lab spends creating this validation study is time that you're not available to test other substances that are coming within the laboratory. And so you may not be able to answer that question today, but it's something that we'll probably want some follow-up from you, even an email saying, if we were to create that validation study, this is what we're talking about in terms of manpower.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. If we were to have just qualitatively, if there's Delta 8 THC present, we do that today. It's if we need to provide some kind of quantitative measure, like we do with Delta 9 THC, where they say if it's above 0.3%, then it's considered marijuana instead of hemp. That's where the time issue would come in with Delta 8 THC.
Okay, thank you for that. Anything else, committee? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate all of you. And congratulations again, Director. Look forward to working with you. Oh, excuse me, Representative Harrelson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And guys, just more just a 30,000 real quick. Looking, Vermont has addressed this. And what they're just saying is any Delta 8 or Delta 10 manufactured through the chemical change prod, I mean, where they actually take the isomer and they do the chemical bond is now considered to be an illegal use of a hemp product. And so that's an idea. I mean, it's literally just a cut and dry. If it's the naturally occurring that just comes very small amounts of CBD, that's fine. But if we can see that you're now converting this through the chemical process, that now is considered an illegal act. Just thoughts on if that's an approach that you're like, yeah, that could work, or no, they're going to run into all sorts of problems because fill in the blank. What's your guys' thoughts on that?
Any thoughts, beginning with you, Ms. Barrett?
Mr. Chairman, I think we would be very close to where we are now with that kind of approach.
Okay, any other thoughts? I would go right on down the road. Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, in my community, we've had several students go to the ER as a result of the loophole in the law and this product being available on the shelves in my community. I'd push back against the time element that we've discussed, the delay in time in implementation of the law. And the reason being is that because public health risk overrides, to me, the product that's on the shelf, the inventory that's on the shelf in the business. Do you think that, I mean, obviously this topic will hit the media as a result of this meeting today, and the fact that the legislature is discussing closing the loophole. Do you think between now and when the legislature convenes in February allows ample time for law enforcement to develop relationships with these businesses and communities and kind of give them a heads up that this is coming, perhaps?
Director Jones, any thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez Williams. Yes, I do think that between now and then would be enough time. However, if this is proposed and it does not become law, I don't know what we would accomplish. You know, like I said before, we've been down this road before with small businesses who are selling the CBD products, and I think we addressed it in a fair manner at that time. So I guess to answer your question, yes, I do think that would be enough time if the law were to be changed. But if the law is to be changed, I think it would be fair for us as law enforcement to give businesses time to look at what they're doing, look at their inventory, and come up with a plan as to how are we going to address this. You know, because they're there to make money, and that's their livelihood. I just don't think it would be appropriate for us to come in on day one and seize all of their inventory, you know, and affect their livelihood.
Okay, anything? Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to roll all the way back here a little ways and just ask you a question. Do you know what the naturally highest level of these substances naturally occurring is in hemp?
Ms. Barrett.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's much less than 1% naturally occurring in hemp, but I couldn't give you an exact number today.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Oh, absolutely.
But you do know it. You don't know it today. You don't have the exact, but you do know it.
I think I've seen Mr. Chairman, I think I've seen literature that states approximately what it is naturally occurring in the plant. I just don't recall that today.
Is that just on that front? Is that something that I assume the growers are getting better at certain things? Thus my comment before, but it just seems like we're ratcheting up. What a wonderful presentation during the session, for example, from our chiefs and sheriffs and the gentleman who came up from the state to the south of us and went through everything that state has gone through. And I was startled at the amount the amounts in these plants now. And that's just the growers, right? Is that happening with hemp? Or do you know?
Mr. Chairman, we do see if you're speaking to the levels of THC, Delta 9 THC in plant material, we do see high levels of THC in plant, Delta 9 THC in plant material. So if that's the question, yes, we are seeing that. If that's not the question, could you please rephrase?
I just think it's a moving target, is what I'm saying. I think they're getting better and better and better, and the percentages of certain things are getting higher and higher and higher, and so more people are ending up in the emergency room. So, okay, well, thank you very much, all three. We reserve the right to come back to you if a question arises. Okay, thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I'd like to go to public comment on this particular topic, on the sex offender registration statutes, the controlled substances that we talked about this morning. Is there any public comment? Is there anyone online with a hand up, Emily? Okay, let's move on then. The next item for our consideration today, internet crimes against children. And look forward to that. Please come forward and state your name for us. And a reminder, in a big room like this, it helps us older members of the committee if you stay close to the microphone. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Chris McDonald. I'm the team leader for the computer crimes team at the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. I'm also the commander of the Internet Crimes Against Children, or ICAC task force here in the state of Wyoming.
Please continue. We've been introduced to the director, and I'm glad he's right there being your wingman. So
am I, Mr. Chairman.
Take it away.
Thank you,
Chris. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I guess I would start. I know there's a question on Wyoming ICAC's ability to work proactive cases, or what we consider UC or chat operations, versus what is our abilities and what are the resources, or what would we need as a body, ICAC, to accomplish those investigations. I think it's important to note when we start to speak on that is what we're comprised of currently as a unit. And the Wyoming DCI's ICAC unit is currently comprised of 6 agents. So those are really 5 full-time agents and 1 agent that is actually assigned to the Southwest Enforcement Team, but really works mostly in ICAC. And those 6 agents are spread out across 3 field offices. That's 1 in Cheyenne, 1 in Rock Springs, and 1 in Casper. So in addition to those 6 investigators, we also have 1 non-sworn forensic investigator. And so we also have a supervisor, which is myself. So that's not the totality of our resource pool. We also leverage our federal partnerships. So we actually work very closely with Homeland Security Investigations. They provide a wounded warrior forensic investigator in our Casper office, which is a large boon to us. And we also have an FBI agent that is on board with our task force that works with us part-time in the Cheyenne office. So we speak about those things when we talk about, and I don't know how familiar the body is with DCI in general, as far as how we operate, but our enforcement teams work regionally. So for example, we have a Northeast, Northwest, Central, Southwest, and Southeast enforcement teams, and they all have their own areas. So in our ICAC unit, we're just a little bit unique in that we actually cover the entire state. So we split the state in thirds with six folks, which is, geographically a challenge, right? We're a medium-sized city with really long streets in the state, and we all know that. So it's a struggle, or it's a challenge to meet those geographical requirements. The big thing especially when we talk about, when we talk about that proactive investigations is, since I took over this unit, or I came into the unit in 2019. And so in 2018, we had what we call, we had 199, what we call cyber tips. And before we get into the numbers, a cyber tip is basically, if you think of any social media platform that you use today, or any of us use, and we can think about Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, any platform whatsoever, if they detect what they believe to be child pornography or child sexual assault material on their servers, they're required to report that to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. So NCMEC is basically just a clearinghouse for those tips. It does has many other arms, but that's the one that we are working mostly. So after NCMEC receives those tips, they actually try to geolocate those using an IP address or other means. And this body sure knows what an IP address, but I had to kind of learn when I go on. I just consider that the phone number to our internet. You know, that's really what that IP address is. Well, if that IP address, or however they geolocate it, comes back to Wyoming, that tip comes to my desk. So in 2018, there's 199 of those. And last year there was 792. So it's about a 298.5% increase with the same amount of folks working that, right? So, you know, it's really both types of cases, both cyber tips, which we would consider reactive, and proactive cases are both extremely valuable cases. But we talk about those differences. When we talk about reactive, it's almost a call for it. Well, it's not almost, it is a call for service. It's just like if we were patrol officers on the street, we get a call for that service. We don't get an opportunity to say, you know, we're not going to do those. We're too busy to do that case. Every single one of those come to my desk, and I vet those and send those out. Now, not every single one turns into a case, right? But every single one has to be vetted and sent out. So I know last year we, as a unit, we received about 66 cyber tips per month. So if another way to think about that is, you know, if you had 66, say, highway interdictions in a month, it would overwhelm the best unit. So with what we work with, I mean, we're doing some amazing work. I have a couple examples. You know, it's difficult for us to deprioritize those cyber tip cases when we get cases where there's one file and they turn into a production case. So for example, when we talk about production, what would come to mind most recently is cases where individuals in the state of Wyoming are sexually assaulting children, videotaping or taking photographs of that, and then sending or trading that material with others that are like-minded. So those are the cases that we work on a daily basis. So those are all, those are difficult when we work those cyber tips, even if it's a one file cyber tip. I mean, just recently worked cases where that occurs. So it's hard to put those down in lieu of, and I don't want to devalue UC case either, because they're so important as well, but you know, they're a little different. And not to use an analogy too great, but it's almost when you're playing cards, when you do a cyber tip, you start with a made hand. Whereas when you're working on an undercover case, you kind of are drawn to a flush, if that makes sense to any of this body. So we're always working, you know, so in undercover cases or chat cases, we also have to work on, you know, we have to get that overt act. There's some challenges there. Like, what does that look like if the person chats but never comes forward, if they don't ever come meet us? So what do we do with that person? You know, we know that person exists out there, but they actually haven't really violated a law. So those are some challenges there. Again, not to say that either one or not, both those cases are vastly important. They're just different. Ideally, I think as a unit, we'd love to be able to do both. Just with 792 reactive cases and 6 folks doing it, it's just difficult to do that at this point.
Wow, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when was the last time you did a UC operation? How many did you do last year? You know, we got a sense of how the tips have gone like this. Can you give me a sense of how the UC operations once were more common and today are less common?
Certainly.
Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. So I would also split, to answer that question, I would also split UC cases kind of in two as well. So we work what we call peer-to-peer cases as well. And a peer-to-peer case is basically a file sharing case. And if anyone remembers, I mean, we go back all the way to Napster or FrostWire or LimeWire, where you're basically sharing files over the internet. So we work those cases in an undercover capacity as well. So we use an undercover computer that's reaching out on the internet and downloading that material from a single source. So we work those cases. I think we worked 7 or 8 of those cases last year. But when we're really talking about the true undercover, the chat cases, we didn't participate in any of those last year, and we haven't for some time. I would say that, prior to 2019, and there's a lot of reasons for that huge increase in cyber tips, but prior to 2019, I'd say it was vastly more peer-to-peer and UC cases. I don't have a number for you, Mr. Chairman, but I know it's greatly different.
Follow up. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions, actually. Maybe I'm going to pin you down and you probably can't answer this, but take a stab at it anyway. What do you think is the big reason for, or the number one reason, I guess, for the huge increase in these cyber tips? And secondly, it sounds like there's a staffing issue. And what do you see that we can do to remedy that? Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, both great questions. I think, I actually get that question a lot about why is the huge uptick in cyber tips? And, in 2019, we all experienced, there was this flu or something that went around apparently for some time that, the pervasive answer to that and originally was, everybody's at home. So we have more access, we have more suspects with access. We also have more children with access, not only, and this is in no way an indictment of the homeschooling, but if we just have kids at home more, online more, that was the thought, right? Well, if that was the case, I would say then I don't know why I experienced another 40% increase in 2022, right? So I think that was coupled, and this is more colloquial information as empirical, but it's almost coupled at that same time. All those platforms really leveraged technology, both artificial intelligence and things like photo DNA, to really help scrub those servers and identify more. So it's a more reporting situation as well as maybe more access. And that reporting continues. As to your second question, I'm a Marine, so I will always say yes. So whatever resources we have, we'll always do our very best. Staffing wise, I would say, there's certainly, if we had, if there's more people, there's more arrests, but I'd also say that we've doubled and for example, like in the year I got here in 2019, we've got 21 arrests total. We had 40 last year. For another example, in 2020, we were recognized, the unit was recognized by the U.S. attorneys. We had actually identified and saved more live victims than the prior 5 years combined. That was 15 in 2020. We actually identified and rescued 28 victims last year, and those are Wyoming kids. So it's difficult to say. Obviously, I don't think that we could ever arrest our way out of this situation. The other thing that we experienced a huge uptick last year was in financial and other types of sextortion cases. So, those have been huge. Those were a huge challenge for us because every single one of those was a priority from NCMEC. So in a sextortion case, real quickly is, and frankly, our biggest victim pool, our increase was young men, young boys. So they would be chatting with someone they believe to be maybe many times an adult female. They would convince them to take, graphic sexual videos or images. As soon as that happened, they would then turn around and say, if you don't send me $500, for example, I'm going to post this to all your friends, family, I'm going to send it to your school and all those. And that resulted in a huge amount of suicidal ideation across the United States. So that was a huge, for example, like in 2018, I think we had 14 of those cases. Last year we had 95. So every single one of those required an almost or as near immediate response as we could. So for us, a lot of those bad actors are overseas. So as a unit, what we did, we prioritized at least reaching out to victims and making sure they had resources. So that was how we started that. And also, we just really doubled down on presentations, internet safety presentations. In 2022, I believe we we were able to reach to about 3,700 students and folks across the state. This year, we've already done over 1,200. I think I did 60 presentations myself in 2022. So just really trying to get the word out. And that I just think that that's a huge part of it.
Okay, follow up. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In speaking with police chief and my community, we talked a little bit about using task force officers. And as I understand it, these are deputy sheriffs and municipal police officers who get assigned to your enforcement teams. Couple parts of this question. Do any task force officers participate in the ICAC team? And if not, could they be? Is there some reason why they aren't utilized more? And the chief also brought up compensation for task force officers, that apparently what we reimburse agencies who supply an officer to a task force, that reimbursement has not been increased in a significant number of years, and that it makes it less inviting for him as a police chief to divert an officer from his patrol force or detectives to a task force. Could you speak to that, either one of you?
Go ahead, Chris.
Mr. Chairman, I can certainly speak to the use of task force officers, and probably Director Jones could better speak to the financial compensation, but it's a great question. I failed to mention prior to, another resource pool we leverage is what we call affiliate agencies. So for the ICAC task force, almost our entire budget is federally funded. So we use that to recruit and supply affiliate agencies. So those are agencies that, although not a true task force officer, we can provide training and equipment, and they agree to assist us with investigations. So we currently have about 8 of those. We use those in this state as more like great, just really valuable points of investigative contact. Like if we have a case in Buffalo, for example, we have a task or an affiliate agency there. We can use those for, on the ground follow-up. It really is a real game changer for us. So that's how we use those. And it's a great question too, because Casper, actually Natrona County, just put on to my knowledge anyway, ICAC's first actual full-time task force officer. So that was a response to DCI's just acknowledgement, and the command staff's acknowledgement of how serious and this issue was. We actually moved one of those task force officers from an enforcement team to the ICAC team, and they're actually starting May 1st. So that's a huge bonus for us. So that's actually one of the first ones. As far as does that answer the question, Mr. Chairman? Regarding the financial compensation, I'd pass it to the director.
Director, you get the hot potato. So
yeah. Mr. Chairman, historically, so we have 4 state generally funded task force officer positions. Historically, those have always been on one of the 5 enforcement teams in the state that primarily investigate drug crimes. I don't know when that program was funded, but I do know that from the time that it was funded till today, the funding is $42,000 per year for the agency that provides the task force officer. Now, when it was started, I'm sure that was probably a pretty good number, but there's no fringe included in that. It's just $42,000, which generally is only paying for a portion of that officer's salary. Now, we do pay overtime, all overtime costs. We provide a vehicle. But recently with some of these positions, we've had a hard time getting agencies to give us a task force officer for that amount of money. So the funding for those positions has been a challenge for us.
okay, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. I think these tie together. So what I think I heard was that ICAC is funded with federal grant dollars. And I'm wondering, was there ever an explanation why the state of Wyoming didn't see it is necessary or valuable to put some state general fund money into ICAC. And secondly, the task force officers are funded through state funds. And how many did you say we're funding? Just 4 statewide?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
But so the federal state question on ICAC, was it because we had a federal grant, we just didn't see it as needed to have state dollars roll in that? Or was there some other reason historically why state funding didn't flow into ICAC?
So Director, I go back a few years to my appropriations days. This is not something that I recall coming in front of the Appropriations Committee back then. But yeah, that would help us to get our arms around, you know, what's state funded, what's federally funded. And then just to add to the co-chairman's question, those local officers that join forces with you guys, is that $42,000? Does that have to be spread out to those individuals as well? Is that the only budget you have to encourage somebody from a local entity to be on a team, for example?
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that question and then I'll refer to Team Leader McDonald for the other question. The $42,000 it's not all of the money, but it's all of the money that we provide to reimburse for salary. The other money, the other expenditures that we have with those positions are any overtime expenditure, travel, and then fuel, vehicle maintenance costs for the vehicle that we provide to them. But the $42,000, it's depending on what agency, what their pay is. It's not enough to pay at least the full salary, even though we expect that person to work with us full time.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. So the question regarding the state and federal funding, and I guess I would walk that back a bit and say the full-time agents, their salaries and their vehicles are paid for by the state. So the entirety of the rest of the ICAC budget, actually the non-sworn forensic investigator and one of the agents is actually paid for through the ICAC grant. The rest of it is almost completely equipment, which is like forensic equipment. And I'll speak to that in just a moment. So forensic equipment, forensic subscriptions, and then travel training. So all of the overtime and all those things come out of that as well. So that's where we're coming from. When we talk about forensically, all those forensic platforms that we use. So our forensic investigator, we actually take in every other forensic request from the state, not dissimilar to the state crime lab. We don't just do ICAC devices. We actually do every device in the state of Wyoming that's sent to us. So that's for every crime, whether it be homicide, robbery, sexual assault. So, we were actually, when we're able to actually put that forensic investigator back on just last year, actually, in 2021, I think we did 44 requests, and those are split about even between DCI devices and outside devices, excuse me. But so just last year we had 157 requests device, and that was split. So, over tripled actually. And this year we've already got 83. So, if we're looking around, it probably won't stay that way, but that's what 332 or so. So, we're just constantly up in the game on what we can accomplish with that. So with that, most of that comes from those federal dollars, all those platforms, all the forensic equipment, every tool that we use to examine a device all comes from federal dollars.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when we have a homicide or some other type of crime that has a forensic piece of evidence, which sounds like almost every case anymore has forensic evidence, that gets sent to your unit, and your forensic investigator then spends time working on that homicide or robbery or whatever other type of crime that was, and that's time not available to do internet crimes against children. Is that it diverts their attention from one topic to the other? Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman. That is accurate, Mr. Chairman. So I would say if it's sent to us, we do it. And so not every single crime is sent to us, but we, especially lately, when people learn that we have a highly capable forensic investigator, build and they will come, right? So that and we're very proud of that as well. So you're correct. Every crime that is sent to us, whether it be ICAC or not, is sent to that forensic investigator who then examines those devices, which does take them away from ICAC crimes. Now, if we have what we would call like a priority 1 ICAC tip, I mean, those are top of the pile, right? So just generally speaking, I mean, we have for example, we have kind of a policy within our own unit that if we get a priority 1 case, which is basically, hey, we get information that there's a child in danger right now, we try to have that person or the child identified and rescued and the person in custody, if possible, within 24 hours. For example, some of our capabilities, just last December, I got a call from the Massachusetts State Police informing me, hey, we actually are on a search warrant right now. We're examining devices with some EXIF data on it. Says that these images look produced, and they appear to have been produced in Green River, Wyoming. So I got that information. I called the guys in Rock Springs. They leveraged their relationships with Green River PD, with Sweetwater County, with the Southwest Enforcement Team. We're actually able to identify and rescue the child and get the person in custody in less than 2 hours. So those are the things that we do. So, it's certainly more resources. That's what, when we talk, that's what we believe we can leverage even more so. So, I mean, that was, to my knowledge, a record for us. And of course, those guys in Rock Springs don't let us forget about that, but it was an amazing case, right? So, but those are things, I mean, those aren't uncommon though. I mean, certainly within less than 24 hours, it's pretty common. So that's what we do. Not every case is like that, but that forensic person for example, also just last week, we traveled to say, Evanston, Wyoming. That forensic investigator needs to go with us to be on scene to preview those. So that's one guy that's got to travel with us, so those challenges are real. So.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you. It sounds like that forensic investigator is top-notch individual that we're fortunate to have. And we've heard about lots of other state employees leaving to go to greener pastures elsewhere. Any worry we could lose that forensic investigator? Are there lots of forensic investigators for us to go out and recruit and bring to Wyoming?
Mr. Co-Chairman, that's like talking about the wind. You're really not supposed to talk to. Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Mr.
I had
Chair.
the same thought.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman. So it's actually a really interesting story. And if you'll indulge me just for a moment. So that investigator is still in college. When he came to me, I'm a Gillette native. He's a Gillette native. The prior director is personal friends with the forensic investigator's dad. The forensic investigator was going to college I think it was Vermont, Champlain College. That's Vermont or New Hampshire. I can't remember, but so during COVID, he had to come home and he inquired as to an internship. And so I wasn't super keen on that initially, but I said, hey, I'll meet with this guy, this young man. Met with him within an hour. I was like, yeah, I want you on the team. We didn't have a position at the time. And then I said, but I can only use you in Cheyenne. And then he didn't have a place to stay, but I lived by myself. So then he ended up living with me for about 1.5 years. So, and all that time he was an unpaid intern. And we of course limited his exposure to some of these cases, right? But just his ability to do that was amazing. He's an amazing individual. We were just able to hire him full-time last July from the grant. Now, to answer the question on whether or not that's, do I worry about that? Absolutely. you will find that like on our ICAC listserv, there's constantly recruitment ads for forensic investigators. They're highly sought after. And he's one of the, I mean, truly one of the best I've been around. So especially for a young man like himself, but you know, and they're hard to come by. You know, we're blessed at the state of Wyoming. We actually have another forensic investigator that's now a team leader in another unit, but he actually created some of the first software that was able to let us exploit that peer-to-peer file sharing. So we're very blessed here at the state of Wyoming. So, you know, I don't know what that looks like down the road, but certainly they're highly sought after.
So really, I'll come to representative here in just a moment. You know, to take that just one step further, I do wonder about our agents and how they do what they do. Of course, some of them work on so many different things, but some of these that we talked about this morning are just heartbreaking, and having to take some of that home, that's pretty worrisome. You know, I'm sure there's some turnover in this kind of thing. I just can't imagine. So I hope you'll pass along our appreciation, you know, to your team. Anyway, Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McDonald, does the ICAC unit produce any sort of annual report? I know there's a lot of interrogation that goes on, and I'm just interested in kind of some looking further upstream at the issues and where these type of cases derive from. And is there any sort of reporting or annual report that we could look at?
Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, we actually provide a monthly report to our federal to the federal grant holders. So that's based strictly on data points, right? So we collect that, and we actually, the same person that created the software to exploit peer-to-peer actually created a what we call activity manager, which we collect all of our data real time. So that is available. I actually I've been ever since last fall, I kind of did this 5-year comparison just to see where we were at. So there's that data, depending upon the data that you're looking for, that is available. We could certainly produce that. If that answers your question, ma'am. Yeah.
So Representative, we may make that request and see if we could bring that back at the next meeting, for example. Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McDonald, mine has to do, I'm going to piggyback on that. Been trying to get in here for this one. So on the results side of this, we see tips way up. I mean, just exponentially way up. And we understand there's a resource issue that we want to deal with for sure. But 40 arrests, 700 and plus tips. How many convictions? How many people did we actually pull off the streets? How many people did we take off? Maybe for your term, 5 years. I realized that the 40 was already this year, or was that last year?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
We had 40 arrests last year. We have actually 16 currently. So what's that, about 64 if we push that out. So I would tell you 40. We pretty much have 100% conviction rate. So these cases are taken very seriously at the state and federal level. We usually examine those to see where they best fit, federally or stateside. You know, we just had a case that out of Chairman Washat's area where an individual was convicted, received 130 years for production of child pornography. You know, it was a very graphic case. So those convictions, I mean, in our unit, typically the arrest is hand to hand with a conviction.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take this opportunity. It seems like a perfect time to I'm just going to say thank you for your work. I can say from on the ground when an ICAC case comes to us, I mean, I just do the paperwork. I mean, so that goes along with what you said. I mean, they're solid. The case is going to go to conviction because of the work you do. So thank you for your work, and on behalf of everybody here, hopefully, in the state of Wyoming. Good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, anything else? Any final thoughts, gentlemen? Oh, Representative Jennings, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd kind of like to change. Thanks for that last answer, and that's very good to know. So I'm curious on a definition having to do somewhat with this. Statute 6-4-102 goes back and talks about some of these registration issues, but for your purpose, it says if the person solicited was a minor. Do you have a definition of solicited? I mean, how do you define that? I mean, because you're getting all these tips and things of that nature. And if you do have a definition, could you kind of give us a overview of what that? I mean, when they call in, how do you determine if they're soliciting a minor? What's the definition of solicited minor?
Mr. McDonald?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, I can't quote you the definition of solicitation from the statute. I don't believe that's what you're asking for. If you are, I apologize. I can't produce that. But I can tell you, so when we talk about tips, when we talk about solicitation specifically, many times those tips come with chat excerpts, if that makes sense. So you will see in those chats many times the request for graphic imagery or activities, even when the child victim or alleged child victim says, "Hey, I'm only 12," or something of that nature. So in that regard, so that starts that case. That certainly doesn't prove it. We have much more work to do within that to prove that up, but that's certainly a good start. When we talk about undercover roles, I don't want to go into a lot of investigative technique here, but it's very, very tightly controlled on, we have to have a lot of consideration for any type of entrapment issues or anything else. So it's very suspect led. So, it has to be very clear cut as to when that person's soliciting, they know exactly that this person is underage. So many of those flags, or it's not a box to check, but for lack of a better term, you have to check all those boxes to go down the road. So it's actually much more involved than you might see on Dateline sometimes. I don't know if that answers your question also.
So, Mr. McDonald, follow-up, Representative, you good? So I do have a follow-up to that, which is what I generally ask our agency folks. Are the statutes adequate to do what you need to do? Have you, at any point in time in the last 4 or 5 years, said, "Boy, I wish our statutes did this," or "I wish it didn't say that"? Are we in a good spot? Are we adequate to get the job done?
Mr. Chairman, I would say thank you for the opportunity to address that. I generally do think we're adequate. I think there are other states that actually do a really good job on some of these things. And that's not to say that we don't do a good job. There's some, like in Montana, there's actually, a higher minimum mandatory for second convictions, like a second subsequent convictions on these cases. We do have a minimum, but their minimum mandatories are much more severe on those recidivism cases. So I think that would be something that would, seemingly address some of those issues. If you were to ask me of a wish list, we get so much anime cartoon, anymore. The CGI animation can be almost virtually indistinguishable, and that language is in statute. But boy, it's really difficult to determine sometimes. I have to get other agents in here and say, is that a real kid or is that CGI? Can we tell? So to clean up some of that language, or to make that a clearly defined violation, might be helpful. Even, there's a lot of talk, and this certainly isn't the highest priority, but language is important to us. There's a lot of discussion on calling something child pornography versus child sexual assault material. Coming into this, I'd already been a cop for 17 years before I started this unit. I honestly didn't think anything could bother me before I got here, and I was wrong. So, pornography is not illegal, and I hate to validate what I have to see every day is that. So sometimes I feel like sexual assault material, even though it's kind of wordy, maybe defines it better. So that might, something I've thought about. So those three items maybe.
Mr. McDonald, just as the chairman of our committee, I would ask that you give it some thought. Take a look when you get back, and if you spot something that you'd like for us to take a look at in that second meeting that comes up a little later in the year, I know the committee would love to take a look at that. One thing that came to my mind as we talked this morning, there's a lot of things going on out there on so many platforms to make you believe something that you're really not seeing. And if somebody were to take advantage of someone else and put their identity out there in a nefarious way, I wonder if our statutes would handle something like that. That just comes to mind. I don't know. And I don't even know if you've run into that before. But there's so much capability out there that somebody can take advantage of someone else if they just didn't like them or wanted to get rid of them, or I can't imagine how horrible that would be. That could happen. Does that make sense? I don't know if you've ever run into that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Actually, the best way I could explain that is with a case example, if that's okay. So we have run into that actually. And one, just from what you said, just one of the statutes that come to mind is like the revenge porn statute, so that's a really good statute. I think that really helps our victims too. But, we actually ran into a case where we had a suspect that, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on how accounts work, but was able to create a username on Snapchat that was very similar to a friend of our victims. So then a username that's almost virtually indistinguishable reaches out for a friend request that gets accepted. The suspect then has access to that victim's story, which would include videos and imagery. The victim, had it was a completely innocent, bathing suit image. The suspect was able to capture that and then use, I'll call it Photoshop, but it wasn't actually that application. Was actually able to use that to create a graphically sexual image with the face of the victim, and then sent it back to our victim saying, if you don't send me more actual images and videos, I'm going to post this to the school and everything else. So that does exist. And what the challenge was like in that case, we thought, well, this must be Photoshop, which is well known, right? This is actually a mobile application on a cell phone that was able to do that. So, technology is a arms race. Every time we feel like we get somewhere, something else is created. It's almost the worst case of whack-a-mole you've ever played in your life. So it's very, I guess for lack of, but that's just that, we oftentimes chase the next thing. So that case example is a perfect one, I think, for what you say, and we do see that.
I would ask a favor of you, Mr. McDonald, if you take a look at that, and I'm looking right behind you at the next row. I'd be interested in if there's any holes in like our revenge statute, for example, or if there's something that we need to consider. When you think about where our culture is, where our society is, how polarized it seems at times, there's some pretty dastardly things going on in terms of what people are doing to each other. And I just want to make sure we're covered on something like that. I can't think of a worse thing to do to somebody. And if that were to happen, I would hope we would bring to bear everything we've got with somebody who would do something like that. Representative Jennings.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I tried to be brief in this one, but Mr. McDonald, you said something that caught my interest there. You said that porn is legal. Did you mean porn's legal for adults? But how does that translate for children? I mean, surely there's laws in place that if you're an adult and you're providing that sort of material to someone underage, surely that's not legal. Could you go into that a little bit more?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings. So we actually have statutes that can help us cover that. You know, even in our so it's child sexual exploitation. If I remember right, it's 64302, I think, if I remember off the top of my head. So inside those definitions, providing that type of material to help sexually exploit a child fits that definition. But we also have, you know, even within child abuse or our obscenity laws in other ways, I feel like we do have language in those statutes that really help protect us, help protect children from that, or that's what it's designed to.
Anything else, committee? Any final thoughts, Mr. McDonald? Oh, Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McDonald, just circling back to your wish list. In the beginning, you talked a little bit about the animated cartoon CGI not being clearly defined in our state statute. Is there any language that you would be willing to provide that would clear that up? Or do you have a model language from another state? Can you just kind of further elaborate on what's needed?
Mr. McDonald.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez Williams, I don't have language didn't bring any prepared for me, and I apologize for that. I think I would like to, if we were to come up with that, I would like to consult with with the Attorney General's office, and honestly be able to research in a greater detail kind of our surrounding states. You know, we share, like, our mountain states, ICAC, we're all very close and we all speak on a regular basis and we're all very like-minded. So I would love to be able to kind of bounce that off all those folks as well and kind of get a good broad idea of what everyone's doing.
I like where you're going, Representative, and we'll certainly later this morning, we'll talk about these issues that have come up this morning. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Just to finish up on the penalty discussion, that 130-year sentence, that was out of federal court, if I remember right, correct? So if that individual had been prosecuted under state statute, what type of sentence would he be looking at?
Mr. McDonald.
Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Chairman, it's difficult to say because our scheduling, the sentencing guidelines are different in state statute. Obviously, I can tell you this, like in Sweetwater County, for example, we did a case very similar, like another priority one case where we had a suspect that was sexually assaulting, recording and trading those images of his 3 granddaughters. So that person received 75 to 100 years. So, which is, a significant, obviously a significant sentence. So I think our federal and state prosecutors generally, in my opinion, do a pretty good job of working together and see where that best fits. There's some things in federal court that make more sense, some things in state court, it just kind of depends. So I think they kind of go back and forth where that best fits. I've worked in both systems for, 22 and a half years. And it's just, truly those folks are wherever best fits they go in this state anyway.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mental health and well-being of your agents, how's that taken care of?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. I was hoping to be able to speak to this. So as I mentioned, so when I came on in 2019, again, I'd been a police officer, law enforcement for, 16, 17 years. I'd never talked to anybody about anything ever. I came into this unit. There's actually a DCI policy that we created that actually makes it mandatory for each ICAC agent to go visit a therapist once a year. So when I came on, I wasn't sure, I'll be frank with this body, I wasn't sure what I thought about that. I went, and because I was the team leader, I felt like it was important for me to go. And again, to be frank, I actually found it very, very valuable. It was a great experience, actually. So we came back, we discussed it as a group, and I actually I put enough money, set aside enough money in the grant. Again, this is grant dollars, but then folks could go as many times as they needed. And it's not a fit for duty. It's actually, you don't even tell the receptionist your name. You just go in and visit with the doc. And then the only thing I get is if the doctor, if there's, the money's gone, then she calls and we just allocate more money. And we actually, the Director Jones and I have actually visited and said, what a good idea that might be, even as a, on a greater scale of things at DCI, you know, just be able to visit with someone. So it's been I'm just thinking to myself, shockingly successful for me. And like the folks that, in fact, a case that we talked about out of another area where someone said, hey man, that really bothered me. I'm gonna visit the doc. And just to be able to have folks that you would never think would be that open about their mental health, being that open about it has been super valuable. And as a group, that's kind of what we bring as a unit. So there's certainly more that we could always do, but that's one thing that we do well, I believe.
Thank you for that, Mr. McDonald. I'll visit with the co-chairman, excuse me, as we go through the interim, but I would sure be inclined to offer any support we can on up the ladder for any considerations that you might be giving to this whole area. Looking at the new director, and we have the ability to communicate officially with our fellow committee members on other teams, and I think we would certainly be willing to do that. So really appreciate you being here. Anything further, committee? Gentlemen, thank you. We appreciate it. We will talk a little later this morning about anything that we might want to try to do to be helpful and not get in the way doing it. So
Thank you.
thank you very much. So committee, I want to go to public comment. Is there any public comment on the internet crimes against children discussion that we've been having this morning? Is there anybody in the room who would like to offer any public comment? Okay, Emily, anybody online? Okay, committee, I want to take a 10-minute break. And we'll come back and finish up. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Just a couple of housekeeping things, committee. We will go through the next bullet point. We want to talk about parental abductions, very important topic. We'll get through that. And then at that point, I want to spend a few minutes at the end of the morning, committee, with any thoughts or requests we would have of our professional staff in terms of more information that we would like, perhaps a bill draft or two if we think that what we heard this morning, if there's something that we have. So take some notes, be ready to talk about that. Then by about 11:30, the committee's going to have to get going. We have a tour of one of the facilities up here, and we will leave about 11:30 to do that. So, okay. Is that anything, Brian, that I've missed? Okay, let's go to parental abductions. Brian, anything from you, or should we go right to our Department of Family Services?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's entirely your call. LSO did prepare a summary paper for the committee on this topic that just summarizes Wyoming law and then other states, as well as uniform laws, both from a criminal and civil perspective.
Nicely done, by the way, too, Brian. Appreciate you guys on that front. Let's go to the Department of Family Services, Office of Guardian ad litem. Whoever would like to or can come forward on parental abductions. Do we have anyone online? Do we have anyone, Emily? I thought we did, perhaps. Okay, thank you. And who are we bringing in, Emily?
And yeah, Mr. Chairman, Lindsay Schilling from the Department of Family Services.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Schilling.
Good morning, Ms. Schilling. We are not hearing you. We need you unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, very good. We can hear you now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Lindsay, for being here. Take it away.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Schilling. I'm the Senior Administrator for the Social Services Division here at DFS. And we don't have anything to present formally this morning. I wanted to be available for questions. Under Title 14, we don't have a lot of intersection or involvement in parental abduction cases. In querying our field statewide, I don't think we had one case of a parental abduction case under a Title 14 action. So we wanted to listen to the conversation and listen to the testimony provided, but generally are sort of peripherals on this conversation.
So, Ms. Schilling, just to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit, we have a good report in front of us here, but that was really one of the questions I had of our department is what kind of prevalence do we have out across with respect to these domestic situations? And it sounds like not a lot has come to the top.
Mr. Chairman, no. In sort of putting feelers out across the field and querying our data system, it sounds like most of the parental abduction cases that we're made aware of are civil matters and private custody matters, and not common at all under Title 14.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions of Ms. Schilling? Go ahead, Representative Chesty.
Thank you, Ms. Schilling. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the briefing materials we have from LSO gave us a briefing on two different acts, the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act, which Wyoming has adopted, and the Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act, which Wyoming has not adopted. Do you have any views as to whether or not there is a need, or would it be preferable from your point of view, for us to consider adopting the Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act?
Ms. Schilling?
Chairman, thank you so much for the question. We don't have any position on that. Those are going to be acts and statute outside of Title 14, so outside of our child welfare, juvenile justice, adult protective services area. So likely more of a criminal or civil matter that I'm sure there are folks in the room that can speak more eloquently to that.
So thank you, Ms. Schilling. Representative Chesty, that's something we can scratch our heads and decide if we want to take a look at that. So we can consider that in a little bit. Anything else for the Department of Family Services? Okay.
Chairman, nothing for us. I'll listen to the conversation and certainly will remain available if there are any additional questions.
I appreciate that, Lindsay. Thank you. We may come back to you if we do have a question. Elizabeth Lance, you were hiding back there. I thought you were here and then suddenly you weren't. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Yeah.
My name is Elizabeth Lance. I am an attorney in private practice at the firm of Lance and Hall in Cheyenne. My practice at my law firm is primarily family law and some criminal defense. So certainly this topic is one of which is touched upon daily within my day-to-day law practice. And so I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here. I appreciate too the thorough memo that was provided by LSO for today. I do think it is quite helpful to look at the comparisons both on the criminal and civil sides as to possible solutions. I will say there's a lot within the law privately that covers what would be considered parental abduction. So I'm not completely sure how narrow a definition this committee is looking at. We see things from just simply a parent for whatever reason denying visitation of their own accord, or a parent without any notice taking the children and moving out of state. We see lots of these kinds of things happening. I'm not sure if we're considering that under the definition of parental abduction, or if we're talking about the kinds of cases where, such as a colleague was just explaining to me, she has a case right now out of the western side of the state where the parents were still married. The wife has mental health issues. She absconded with the children and has virtually disappeared. They've been unable to locate her or the children. She's done a very good job of getting rid of her vehicle, getting rid of her credit cards, and is just completely untraceable at this point. So those kinds of things also happen. Obviously, that's one that we would consider a parental abduction situation as well. But certainly this runs the gamut potentially, where we're talking about just denying visits to, completely disappearing with children. Another colleague had a case where a mother did her research and absconded with the children to Costa Rica, which is a country that will not cooperate with the United States in returning the children. And so that father has given up. He will not see his kids again, as far as he knows, until potentially they're adults. But so these things definitely happen. And I will say, I've also spoke to several colleagues where this memo had touched on the idea that Wyoming does not currently have that uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act. And I believe 14 states currently have that. And that would be something that actually would be potentially quite helpful. I know the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence also supports Wyoming adopting that. They see these cases a lot where an abuser may abduct the children as additional form of abuse. And so certainly that is one solution civilly. which wouldn't be potentially as heavy of a lift. It's an act that, essentially fits right in with what we've already adopted. We already have what we call the UCC JEA. And so that Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act goes hand in hand with that, which is already within our statutes. And so it would, I think, be easily integrated into our laws. And what it creates is a really useful solution when a parent has some concept or idea that the other parent may be a potential parent that would attempt to abduct the children. It is a way in which you can get a very special hearing and a special order that would outline a lot of things that would help prevent that, such as denial of passports, things of that nature, where you could potentially prevent the ability of that parent to abscond with the children.
So, Ms. Lance, thank you very much. Really appreciate your testimony. That was actually a question that I had as I read through the material and I have not had time to study that uniform law. And it sounds like you're pretty up to speed on it. And so thank you for that. So you feel like it would fit and it would work and be useful to practices like yours?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do think that it would be quite beneficial for our citizens and our clients that we represent as an additional tool to try to prevent these kinds of abductions that occur. I do think too, it has been endorsed by the ABA and family practitioners at the national level as well, as something that would be very helpful for states to adopt and be able to help potentially prevent. Obviously, nothing is going to create a perfect scenario to prevent all things, but it would be an additional help, I believe.
Do you have any sense of why there's been any reluctance to take up this legislation or adopt it along the way? Have you heard anything?
Mr. Chairman, I will say, to my knowledge, I don't know that anyone in the legislative body has necessarily been approached about it. I'm not sure that it has necessarily ever been brought up before this body as something that would be useful.
Let's go to Representative Chestik first and then to Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Lance. Appreciate your comments. You started to explain this, but I'm still a little unclear. What specific new tools would the Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act give you that you don't have now?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Chestik. Once you go through this, you can see that it would include things which would disallow one of the parents to travel outside a specific geographic area with the children. It could impose different travel restrictions, such as being unable to leave the United States. As I had mentioned, potentially restricting the ability of that parent to hold or obtain passports for the children. I will say I had a case years ago in which one of the parents, through the divorce, he was also a dual citizen of a Middle Eastern country, which would be another situation where the mother was very afraid that he would travel to that country with the children and they'd never return. In that case, we were able to convince the courts under our existing law to restrict him from obtaining passports. So we were able to accomplish it without this, but it was questionable. And I will say the district court struggled with that, where I think if we had a law like this that made it so clear that the court had this authority and could do these things, I think it would have been much easier to ensure that in that case. Another thing that can be done is a parent could be required to post a bond that they would forfeit. So if they were ever to later abscond with the children, that bond amount of money would be forfeited due to that behavior. And so that's another deterrent for that parent to abduct. And so.
Okay. Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question that was very similar, so it's been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since we haven't passed this in Wyoming, it looks like 14 states and 4 others just barely passed legislation. What kinds of tools do we have at our disposal to be able to deal with these things if we really feel like a parent is a abduction risk, I guess, for the child?
Ms. Lance, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, right now, certainly there are tools that people use. If, for example, a parent without notice takes the children, moves out of state, we would represent that person. We would bring something such as a contempt of court action for if there is an existing order that requires certain custody and visitation provisions, which are then being violated. And contempt is a very useful tool for the courts. I think the frustration that sometimes occurs is civil court can be slow. And so a parent can go some months, sometimes longer, without any contact with children until that can finally get in front of the court and decisions can be made. So we have tools. One thing too that I did find that we do currently have, if you do believe right now that the children would be in serious physical harm, or that the parent there's an imminent threat that the parent would leave the state with the children, you can petition the court for a warrant to take physical custody of the child. So that would enlist the assistance of law enforcement to take custody of that child in order to prevent that. But that only can be utilized when there already is an existing court order regarding custody of the children, which often there isn't. Such as the example I said where the parties were actually still married and the one party abducted the children and left. Obviously, there would be no custodial court order at that point because they were married. And additionally, often unmarried parties have not yet established a custody order. And so they've been existing without one. And then one of the parents seeks to take the child and leave the state. But there are certainly ways under civil law that attorneys use and are creative to bring these issues in front of our courts. But I think anytime that we can have something like the Prevention of Abduction Act in our law, it makes it much easier because it gives an outline for exactly what the courts need to do to hear that, to provide that kind of hearing, and exactly what attorneys need to do in order to effectively argue for their clients.
Good. Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lanson. So Family Services doesn't, for whatever reason, seem to think that this is over. Can you give us a feel for how many you work in this field? How many cases last year did you work with that this would make a difference?
Go ahead, Ms.
Mr.
Lance.
Chairman, Representative Jennings, as far as the actual Uniform Prevention of Child Abduction Act specifically, I would say I probably had 1 or 2 cases in which that would specifically have assisted. I will say as far as some of what is covered in the interference of custody that was laid out in this criminal statute that was also provided in this memo, that we see much more frequently, that custody is simply being interfered with, custody is being denied, things like that. I would say nearly 100% of our custody cases involve those kinds of situations.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't that move it to a criminal level of contempt at the point that that occurred?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, yes, if you have an existing custody order, you can bring contempt. And that is typically exactly how we as practitioners handle those situations. Rather than we very infrequently see it handled criminally. In fact, almost never. I put out actually onto a criminal listserv for Wyoming criminal defense attorneys, whether they saw this statute ever being used or filed. And the answer is no. Our prosecutors and law enforcement do not typically file or charge anything with interference of custody in these situations. And so while the statute exists, it's essentially never utilized. It's typical anytime our clients talk to us about trying to contact law enforcement for these custody issues that they're immediately told it's a civil issue and they will not intervene.
Ms. Lance, go ahead, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question regarding, I'm not sure I understand the full definition of parental abduction. What we're talking about here is only after there's a court order. Is that correct? And does a parent have the authority right now to load their children up and take them to another state without the other parent's permission if they're married prior to court action? Is that that's kind of a gray area is what I'm hearing here.
Ms. Lance.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, it is, and it is complicated. And that's why I said at the beginning, I'm not exactly sure what this body wants to address. If you're looking only at the idea of these sort of high level criminal abductions, where the attempt is to disallow any continued contact at all by the other parent. Or if we're talking about what we see frequently, which is a parent does not provide 30 days notice of a potential move, just takes the children, moves across state lines, and begins to deny visitation, either because of whatever reason they're denying visitation, and or just by virtue of now they're so far apart geographically that their visitation is essentially then being denied because of the geographic location. So there are a lot of nuances with this, and often there are court orders, but often there aren't court orders. And so we see both types of cases also, which is what further complicates it. When there is a court order already in existence, sometimes that court order will address the ability or non-ability of one of the parents to move with the children. We try to be thorough about those issues ahead of time if we contemplate them when we are drafting custody and divorce custody orders. But sometimes those issues aren't contemplated by the order at all. And it becomes further complicated because as Americans, we have constitutional rights to freedom of movement. And so it becomes a question as to you may be violating a custody order, but you also have a constitutional right to move. And so there become a lot of questions there. If this were done properly, if a client came to me, the proper way to do this is to file that change of custody prior to any move. You file notice that a party intends to move. You resolve how you're going to allow visitation to the other parent pending the move, during the move, after the move, and you work to do those things all up front. And if you do that, then I would say you're actually following the law.
Okay, follow up, Senator.
That's all well and good if there's a custody order, but let's suppose the mother or the father has decided that what we're doing here in Wyoming isn't working for them. They load the kids up and move back to Wisconsin where they came from, another state. Prior to any court action, is that an abduction?
Ms. Lance.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, it is not interference with custody, so it would not fall under our current statute, because if no custody has been established, so again, there is no custodial order and they have moved, then no, I don't believe that that's going to rise to the level of criminal parental abduction.
Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to, Ms. Lansing, pursue a little bit back into the question of interference, and then that becomes contempt. Because having served on this committee for however many years I've been on it, 4 or 5 years, I think. I see this and we just kind of barely skim the surface to that. It sounds to me like that there's interference that becomes contempt, but then I hear you say doesn't go anywhere, almost never goes anywhere. And yet that's a criminal activity. It seems like the court would be very interested at that point to step in and say, Mr. Law Enforcement, go enforce the law. This is contempt. So it sounds to me like what you're describing is some kind of breakdown inside the system right now. Could you speak a little bit more to that? Because if that's happening, then maybe that's something that we ought to address.
Ms. Lance.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, yes, I will say in the civil arena, even when contempt is found, sanctions that courts bring typically are not things such as warrants or jail time or anything of that nature. The contempt is typically addressed either just by nature of what custody they end up then ordering, right? So if that one parent is not doing a good job of allowing the other parent to see the children, they will place the children with the appropriate parents in that situation. Sometimes they will order a sanction, such as maybe attorney's fees having to be paid, but that is the extent of what we typically see as any kind of recourse for those violations of orders.
So, Ms. Lance, a couple of things. One, thank God we've got people like you who work in family law. I'm pretty sure they just wave you through when you get up there after all this is over. I'm pretty sure St. Peter just says, you worked in family law, so you get to go right on in. It strikes me this morning that not everybody has access to somebody like you, though. And that's the piece that I've just been thinking about during our conversation. And then, of course, the piece that do we as the Judiciary Committee want abductions to happen? Is there something we can do to make sure that we close any loophole that's out there? And just to reiterate, it sounded like you thought that this Uniform Act is at least a start. Maybe there's some other things you could suggest, but if I remember correctly, you indicated that would be something that you think might help.
Mr. Chairman, I do think it does serve to provide, as I said, some extra tools for practitioners and the court both, when the thought that a parent may be someone who would think about abducting with those kids. And or maybe they've even specifically threatened that in the past, that you would be able to work through these in a hearing with the court and hopefully get a solid court order that would help protect those children from at least being able to be taken out of the country, which obviously would be completely devastating. But certainly potentially even out of a more narrow geographic area. So I do think that would be helpful. I do think it provides a lot of tools for practitioners and our clients. As you mentioned, I too realize that particularly in the area of family law, so many people do not have the resources to hire private attorneys, or maybe one party has been able to acquire a legal aid attorney and one party has no attorney. And it can become a difficult process for people, certainly. In those kinds of situations, particularly when you're talking about something that becomes really complicated, such as trying to prevent abductions by another parent. So I do feel for those people, access to justice obviously is always an ongoing issue. I will say I did speak also with Professor Playton at the University of Wyoming. She runs a law clinic that helps serve indigent parties dealing with family law issues. And she also supports a passage of the Uniform Prevention Child Abduction Act as well. So she also agreed that that would be something that would be a good tool for Wyoming practitioners to have.
Representative Chesney, then we'll come back to the co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lance. So it seems like we might have identified a loophole here that maybe we could fill with legislation. The Uniform Child Custody Act clearly applies where there's a custody order in place for enforcing that. Am I reading the memo correctly that the Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act, on its face, it seems to require some kind of a custody dispute, a pre-existing custody dispute? Is that a requirement to get into this act? And I have a follow-up. I mean, can this act apply when there is not a current custody order in place? Do you know?
I know. I'm trying to recall.
The briefing memo suggests that a party to a child custody determination may file some additional relief if there's a risk of, yeah.
I might be able to help with this. Katie Adams, staff attorney for LSO. From the notes that I found from the Uniform Law Commission, they are trying to address situations where there's not yet a child custody determination.
Oh, okay.
So they have their Uniform Act and then they have notes on it, and they say that, you know, many abductions occur before a court has had the opportunity to enter a child custody determination. And this is aimed at those types of situations so that it can apply pre-decree or post-decree.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Back to you, Representative.
Yeah, so my comment, it's more of a comment than a question, that is, a Uniform Act is not like a compact where we can actually change the terms of the Uniform Act, and if it's not super clear, we could clarify that this does apply. Yeah, maybe it is clear. I haven't read the act itself, the Uniform Act, but if it's unclear, we can make it clear, change the language of the proposed Uniform Act and make it clear that this would provide some relief prior to a formal custody dispute. And I think that therefore could make this a very useful addition and a much stronger tool for what you need to do. Thank you.
Ms. Lance, do you agree with that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. Yes, I appreciate Katie from LSO's clarification. I think that that is quite an important part of this and its usefulness, certainly. And I would agree also with Representative Chestek that while it is a Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act, which is a uniform act, certainly this body could make different amendments or changes as it see fits for the state of Wyoming.
Okay, thank you for that. Did I see Mr. Co-Chairman? I think you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things. One, we've heard some testimony about law enforcement officers just saying, hey, this is a civil matter. We're not going to enforce 62204 interference with custody. For the committee's edification, are there consequences for a peace officer who might attempt to use that criminal statute only to find out that it really was purely a civil matter and not a criminal matter? Is there a reason why law enforcement, in other words, won't get involved in some of these cases? And the second part of that is, do we have any laws in Wyoming dealing with harboring, where sometimes we have runaways or other folks and somebody else is, you know, oh no, she's not here, but in fact, that runaway or that missing person is in fact present, or maybe even a fugitive is present and they're being hidden by somebody. do our laws cover harboring? Do we have any, that, I know it's a little out on the edge for you, but I think it's related. I'm saying, you know, that when you're harboring somebody, you can also be interfering with the custody of that child. So your comments, please.
Slants.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Washut, as far as law enforcement declining to get involved, I can only say that I would assume that the concern is that if charges were brought or they brought this to the prosecutors, that they feel that it may be immediately dismissed. So it's hand in hand, right? Law enforcement and our district attorneys and county attorneys. And so it may just be that they know that the presiding prosecutor typically doesn't bring these, and so there would be no point, you know, as far as that goes, or they know that it would potentially be dismissed because there's going to be some kind of defense for the reason that custody is denied, et cetera. Under the law, it is affirmative defense currently if there is a true health and safety issue of the child. And so that is another time we will see a parent appropriately deny visitation to another parent, is that they have a strong reason to believe that if they were to allow that visitation, that it would be a true safety issue to their child. And so that is an affirmative defense. And so potentially law enforcement is hearing immediately that kind of defense and feeling that that would not go anywhere criminally, and that is a matter to be handled civilly. So that could be the situation there. I will say I am not personally very familiar with Wyoming's laws regarding harboring. I was a public defender for many years, and I will say I never had a case regarding any kind of harboring of you know, felons or any of that. So I can't really speak to that. I would just say that as far as the interference with custody, it would cover any kind of interference. So that would mean, you know, if the neighbor, you know, said, I'm going to keep your kid this week because I think you're fighting too much or something of that nature, right? That would technically be interference with custody. So I think that statute as we have it now covers a pretty broad gamut of any kind of interference with custody.
Okay, further questions, committee? Oh, Representative Oakley, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really a question, I guess, just along these same discussions. I would caution against, I guess, saying the refusal of law enforcement to use this. I don't think that's an accurate portrayal of what's happening. Law enforcement, I believe, is definitely aware of the statute. Just like anything, then there's an analysis done on whether that's the appropriate action. And there are many custody disputes that are happening in all of our communities. People are, you know, upset and mad at each other, and they fight over this stuff, and they do have a remedy with the courts. So it is a civil matter. I mean, you can start out basically with the blanket statement that this is a civil matter for them to take to the courts and to determine that way. So to hit the level that, you know, somebody is actually taking the child, there might be some danger, some reason that you would charge this felony charge. Law enforcement, I would say, is aware that it's there. It's used sparingly, and it's used sparingly for a reason. So I would say based on an appropriate analysis. So just to I think maybe be cautious as far as them not knowing or quote unquote refusing. There has to be this criminal intent, this criminal action taken. Law enforcement, I say you don't want to race to the police station, right? And given the opportunity, many parents would do that. So you just have to, that needs to be really kept at the forefront, I think, of considering these things, that before it becomes criminal, it needs to be certainly carefully analyzed, that that's what it is.
That's a good cautionary tale, Representative. Unfortunately, in so many of these matters, the kids are used as weapons. And it strikes me, and I appreciated, Ms. Lance, you alluded to the fact early on that some of this touches in the domestic violence world as well in that regard, because it's just unfortunate. But we have some people who use their kids as weapons and as the ability to abuse their partner even further. But that's a little bit over on the side, kind of like the co-chairman said, well, this is on the side. There's a lot of sides to this. So anyway, really appreciate you being here this morning, Ms. Lance. Any further questions? We're going to wrap it up. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Further testimony? Thank you, Ms. Lance. We've reserved the right to ask a question later. So. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Travis Koltiska. I'm the police chief, Sheridan Police Department. I'm also executive board member of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. When this topic was introduced, it was pulled across many board members regarding the frequency in which a true parental abduction occurs. And it is although it does happen, and can be very traumatic, it is a very infrequent thing that occurs in the state of Wyoming. And to look at the term of a true parental abduction, at that point, a parent, usually an abduction of that type, usually involves a parent whose parental rights have been terminated either through the courts or voluntarily due to their status. At that point, they will take custody from this custodial parent, the one that has been awarded full-time custody without any visitation or potential partial custody by the other parent. So in those situations, statutes are more than adequate to remedy those through the criminal court. What is by far the more overwhelming issue that law enforcement faces is, as Chairman Landon said, parents using children to get back at one or the other. It is one parent indicating that the other did not follow the order, the civil order that's in place, because the child was gone an extra couple hours, or, there's many minor things that could potentially be against that order that don't rise to the actual interference with custody. There's no custodial interference of a parent. So that is by far the overwhelming issue that law enforcement deals with. And they are civil violations, as Representative Oakley indicated. And at that point, we advise them that the remedy is through the district court where the custodial agreement was originally in place.
Thank you for that, Travis. Really appreciate it. Anything, committee? Okay, we'll go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, when we're dealing with situations involving not necessarily parental abductions, but it could be, we have a runaway situation. Maybe the child leaves one parent, goes to the other parent. Law enforcement gets a runaway report. We go to that other parent's house and we say, is Susie here? And they say, no, Susie's not here. The interference with custody talks about harboring, but are the laws adequate in that situation? Would that be a harboring if they deny that the child is present?
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Part of the interference with custody also indicates that the child is over 14. So if they're over 14, that would not be applicable, and runaways can be between 15 to 17, as well as that they're there on their own volition. So in that situation, that interference with custody, as you described it, would not fit the statute in that situation. There is child endangerment and other statutes that some of the language is much more broad that would allow, depending on the circumstances and situation that we are encountering, that could be adequate in that situation. We have adequately utilized statutes in situations as you described. many times.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Kara Chambers, Division of Victim Services. I just wanted to briefly touch on the fact that, DFS, Department of Family Services, and DVS don't see a lot, not meaning it doesn't happen, but we're only going to get involved when there's that criminal nature where you have it's not a custody dispute, but there's that true health and safety concern and it's risen to a criminal level. So I don't want you to think that it doesn't happen. It's just we're talking about two different things. And so on my side, when we do have a criminal action, by maybe a biological parent who doesn't have any custody rights, we do take actions. And in fact, we've seen those. I've worked with families where we had in Cheyenne many years ago, a mother who they were involved in Department of Family Services and Child Welfare, where she attempted to take the child. Well, she did take the child. She ran out of a supervised visitation facility and ran with the kid. And of course, law enforcement pursued and recovered the child. We have, cases where, you'll see an Amber Alert. And a lot of times those are family members or maybe biological parents who have a terminated right who've taken the kid. So that does happen and law enforcement does get involved. I just wanted to make sure we're clear. We're talking about two different things. So.
Thank you, Kara. Appreciate that. Okay, thank you very much. Did you have something, Representative Jennings?
I do, Mr. Chairman. To Ms. Chambers. Chief Kultiska is actually my chief, and glad to see him here today, and still grateful that I'm not familiar with the back seat of a squad car. But I'd like to ask Ms. Chambers a question. So I have heartburn when we start using words like prevention, because we're under rule of law and you're under the executive part, and Mr. Kultiska is under the law enforcement side of that. And prevention, when you start looking at that, it starts getting into a question of rights. And family law has got to be the hardest thing out there, because has so many nuances to it. But the problem that I have with things like that is that when we begin thinking preventative wise, and I'm not against prevention, or at least certainly not the court taking prevention. But where do you go with that? You start going into the criminal's mind, and we might as well pass prevention of theft or prevention of assault or prevention of murder. Those would be great things. But with that also go rights. So would you touch on that a little bit too? Because it would seem like that probably in both of your cases, you would be dealing with that. You have to weigh that thing and figure that out. If we go down this road of prevention, we're trying to figure out and tell people what this might look like. And this is very nuanced. I mean, it's families, every family's different. What they see is, and so if, a court can sit there and say, and they can already do a lot of these things for criminal or civil, then it can rise from civil to criminal. So if you could touch a little bit on that, maybe soothe me a little bit about people's rights.
Chairman, Representative Jennings. So you're correct. The right to parent your child is a fundamental right, which is one of the strongest. So when I was distinguishing between the criminal actions that I see is when that right has been terminated and those parents don't have rights, and that is a purely criminal action. I think as far as I don't work in the civil realm at all, but from what I understand about the Uniform Act, as far as trying to put some sideboards to look at this. I think what you need to understand is the reason the adoption of the act that we don't have as far as parental abduction is what you'll see happen is something's gone wrong. A parent may believe that they're about to lose custody, or they're going, something's going on, and they may run with the child. And it is very messy. And so having the ability to try to enforce things to stop that from happening before it happens, that is sort of prevention. But you're right, these are fundamental rights, which is why things that we've sort of danced around here is, trying to get these things into court quicker, making sure that parties have adequate representation. It's hard for me to get too deep in the weeds on the civil because I'm going to be dealing with victims of crime, whether, if a parent has sought a protection order that includes the children, and then maybe the offender has gone off with the children. I mean, you've got enforcement of a civil protection order that has criminal consequences. I would argue that all of our criminal statutes are there to prevent crime. I mean, that's why we have criminalized the behavior, so that you're on notice that if you do this, there are consequences. But yeah, there's no easy answer, but you're right. Both parties, until it is determined by a court that one should not have parental rights or otherwise, then it's a purely civil family law matter, and both parties has fundamental rights. Where I come in is when someone has harmed a child or, something else, and then I'm pretty clear on what should happen with that. And that gets involved in the criminal realm, but there's no easy answer to your question, sir. But I hope I've tried at least, and maybe the chief has some thoughts.
So it seems, thank you. And Chief, I'll let you pine in real quickly and then we'll have to wrap up for the morning. Unfortunately, I'll get to that in a minute, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mhm.
Representative Jennings, you're absolutely correct that protection of people's constitutional rights is the first priority of police and law enforcement. And with this act, it is, again, another civil order. So until they move into overt acts that move it from a civil to a criminal side of the house, law enforcement's main responsibility will be to investigate and make a determination of what the circumstances are surrounding each report as it's made into us, and then have to make a judgment call based on what has occurred in front of us. And it's a tough predicament that we get placed in quite often, but it's one we're prepared for and ready to tackle any chance we get.
We appreciate that, Chief. We appreciate the restraint that you and your colleagues out across the state come up with every day and have to show. So committee, regretfully, we've run out of time for this morning. The committee has an appointment to visit a state facility. And I know we have good folks here who wanted to testify on this issue. And I'm sorry we ran out of time this morning. I hope it's not too onerous that we grab a bite of lunch and come back afterwards, and we'll pick this up as soon as we come back, folks. Committee, I regret that we ran out of time to talk about these 3 bullet points this morning. Save your notes, because I think there is an opportunity on a couple of fronts that we may want to look at, say a bill draft, maybe some additional information that might be helpful to us as we go into a second meeting. So keep your notes. We'll come back after lunch and we'll take that up. We'll also finish up on parental abduction. I do want to get to public comment and want to give it enough time, and we can't do that between now and 11:30. So, pardon me, 2 p.m. We'll come back in at 2 to give us time. And I'm sorry to hold folks over, but I do want to give enough time that we can give consideration to public comment. So, Brian, any thoughts for the committee as to what's up at this point?
No, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I would note is we also do have folks online for this topic who have signed up.
Again, thank you very much. Appreciate those online. Appreciate your indulgence, and sorry we ran out of time this morning, but we'll come back at 2, take this up. And committee, we are on a lunch